Dr. Sarah Chen had always found peace in the ancient forests of the Pacific Northwest. As a wildlife veterinarian specializing in large mammals, she spent most of her days treating domestic animals in her clinic, but her true passion lay in the wilderness that stretched beyond the small mountain town of Cedar Falls. The morning started like any other Tuesday. Sarah was reviewing lab results when her phone buzzed with an urgent message from Jake Morrison, the local forest ranger. Emergency at Clearwater Trail. Need your help immediately. Bring tranquilizer gun and medical supplies. Without hesitation, Sarah grabbed her emergency kit and loaded her truck with everything she might need. The drive to Clearwater Trail took 45 minutes through winding mountain roads lined with towering Douglas firs and western hemlocks. The autumn air was crisp, and golden leaves danced in the morning light as she pressed harder on the accelerator. When she arrived at the trailhead, Jake was waiting with 2 other rangers and a small crowd of hikers who looked shaken. Jake's weathered face was grim as he approached her truck. "We've got a situation about 2 miles up the main trail," he said, helping her unload equipment. Hikers reported a massive black bear acting aggressively. "But when I went to investigate, I found something else entirely." They hiked quickly through the familiar forest path. Sarah had walked these trails countless times since moving to Cedar Falls 5 years ago. She knew every switchback, every creek crossing, every clearing. But today, something felt different. The usual sounds of the forest seemed muted, as if the wildlife was hiding. There, Jake pointed ahead to a small clearing where the trail curved around a massive fallen cedar. "But, stay back. I've never seen anything like this before." As they approached the clearing, Sarah heard it before she saw it. A deep, rumbling sound that was part growl, part whimper. It sent chills down her spine, but not from fear. It was the sound of an animal in terrible pain. The creature that came into view defied everything Sarah thought she knew about the wildlife in these mountains. It stood nearly 8 feet tall on its hind legs, covered in thick, dark fur that seemed to shimmer in the filtered sunlight. Its massive shoulders and arms suggested incredible strength, but it was the eyes that captured her attention. They were intelligent, almost human-like in their expression of pain and fear. "What is that thing?" whispered one of the rangers behind her. Sarah studied the creature carefully. Its left hind leg was caught in what appeared to be an old-style bear trap, the kind that had been banned in the state for decades. Blood had matted the fur around the wound, and the animal was clearly exhausted from trying to free itself. Deep gouges in the nearby trees showed where it had tried to use leverage to escape. "It's been here for days," Sarah realized aloud. "Look at the ground around the trap. It's worn down from pacing and struggling." The creature noticed their approach and let out a warning growl, but it didn't charge. Instead, it seemed to be studying them with the same careful attention Sarah was giving it. She had worked with enough wild animals to recognize the signs of an intelligent predator weighing its options. "We need to help it," Sarah said firmly. "Are you crazy?" Jake responded. "We don't even know what that thing is. It could be dangerous." "It's already dangerous," Sarah replied, slowly removing the tranquilizer gun from her pack. A creature that size, in that much pain, with those kinds of injuries could easily hurt someone if it breaks free on its own. And if infection sets in, it'll die a slow, painful death. She began calculating dosages in her head. Without knowing the creature's exact species or weight, she would have to estimate based on what she could observe. Too little tranquilizer and the animal might not be sufficiently sedated for her to work safely. Too much could be fatal. "I need you all to back up about 50 yards, she instructed the group. "If something goes wrong, I don't want anyone else at risk." The creature watched as the humans retreated, its dark eyes never leaving Sarah. She spoke in low, soothing tones as she prepared the tranquilizer dart. "Easy there, big guy. I know you're scared and in pain, but I'm here to help." The animal tilted its massive head, almost as if it was listening to her words. Sarah had seen this behavior in some of the more intelligent species she'd worked with, but never to this degree. She raised the tranquilizer gun slowly, taking careful aim at the creature's upper thigh where the muscle was thick enough to absorb the dart safely. The animal tensed, recognizing the threat, but didn't move to attack or flee. "I'm sorry," Sarah whispered as she pulled the trigger. The dart found its mark, and the creature let out a pained roar that echoed through the forest. It looked down at the dart, then back at Sarah with what she could have sworn was an expression of betrayal. Then, it began to sway as the sedative took effect. Within minutes, the massive form collapsed onto the forest floor with a ground-shaking thud. Sarah waited another 5 minutes to ensure the tranquilizer had fully taken effect before approaching. Up close, the creature was even more remarkable. Its fur was incredibly thick and soft, clearly adapted for harsh mountain winters. Its hands, while massive, had surprisingly dexterous fingers with retractable claws. The facial structure was a blend of human and ape characteristics that defied classification. But Sarah's immediate concern was the wound. The bear trap was an old, cruel device with serrated teeth that had bitten deep into the creature's leg. The bone might be fractured, and infection was already setting in around the edges of the wound. Working quickly but carefully, Sarah used bolt cutters to break the trap springs and gently pried the jaws open. The creature stirred slightly as the pressure was released, but the sedative held. She cleaned the wound thoroughly with antiseptic solution, applied antibiotic ointment, and wrapped the leg in sterile bandages. "Jake, I need you to help me get this trap out of here," she called out. "And document everything. Take photos of the trap, the wound, the creature. We're going to need evidence of what happened here." As they worked to remove the evidence of human cruelty from the peaceful forest clearing, Sarah couldn't help but wonder about the creature she had just treated. Its intelligence was undeniable, its gentleness surprising. Despite its size and obvious strength, it had never once attempted to harm her, even when she was close enough to touch. The tranquilizer would last for several hours, giving the creature time to rest and begin healing. Sarah left additional antibiotic supplies nearby, along with some high-energy food supplements that might help with recovery. As they prepared to leave the clearing, Sarah took one last look at the sleeping giant. Something deep in her chest told her this encounter would change everything she thought she knew about the wilderness she loved so much. The hike back to the trailhead was quiet, each person lost in their own thoughts about what they had witnessed. But Sarah's mind was already working on the next challenge. The creature would wake up in a few hours, and then what? Would it disappear back into the deep forest? Would it remember her kindness? More importantly, who had set that illegal trap, and why? The device was clearly old, but it had been recently placed in an area known for hiking trails. Someone had put that trap there knowing it could injure or kill whatever stepped into it. By the time they reached their vehicles, Sarah had made a decision that would reshape the course of her life. She was going to find out who was responsible for nearly killing this magnificent creature, and she was going to make sure it never happened again. The forest had revealed one of its most carefully guarded secrets to her, and she wasn't going to let that trust be betrayed. 3 days after the encounter at Clearwater Trail, Sarah found herself unable to concentrate on her regular veterinary work. Every domestic cat with an ear infection and every dog with a limp reminded her of the massive creature she had treated in the forest. She had submitted her official report to the wildlife authorities, but something nagged at her about the whole situation. The bear trap had been deliberately placed, that much was certain. But who would set such a dangerous device in an area frequented by hikers and families? Sarah decided she needed to investigate further. That evening, she returned to the clearing with a backpack full of supplies and a determination to find answers. The creature was gone, as expected, but signs of its presence remained. The bandages she had applied lay in a neat pile beside the tree where it had been trapped, carefully removed rather than torn off in panic. More intriguingly, there were clear tracks leading away from the clearing. Not random wandering, but a purposeful path toward the deeper, more remote sections of the forest. Sarah followed the trail for nearly an hour before darkness forced her to turn back, but what she discovered along the way challenged everything she thought she knew about wildlife behavior. The creature had stopped at 3 different locations on its journey. At each stop, there were signs of deliberate action. At the first, it had carefully arranged fallen branches to create a shelter around an injured fawn that was too weak to keep up with its herd. At the second, it had cleared debris from a natural spring that had become blocked, restoring water flow to a section of the forest where smaller animals gathered to drink. The third stop was the most remarkable. The creature had discovered another trap, this one set near a game trail frequently used by deer and elk. But, instead of triggering it accidentally, the intelligent being had somehow disarmed it, leaving the metal device carefully dismantled beneath a pile of leaves. Sarah realized she wasn't just dealing with an unknown species. She was observing a creature that actively protected other forest inhabitants. Whatever this being was, it served as a guardian of the wilderness. Her investigation was interrupted by the sound of approaching vehicles. Sarah quickly hid behind a large tree as two men with flashlights entered the clearing where she had first encountered the creature. Their conversation carried clearly in the still night air. "The trap's gone," said the first man, his voice rough and irritated. "Something must have found it." "Maybe that Forest Service girl took it," replied his companion. "I told you we should have used the remote cameras to see what triggered it." "Doesn't matter now. We'll set up new ones deeper in the forest. If there really is something valuable living out here, we're going to catch it." Sarah's blood ran cold as she listened to their plans. These weren't hunters looking for standard game. They were specifically targeting the creature she had helped, and they clearly intended to capture it alive for some unknown purpose. "The client is paying too much money for us to go home empty-handed," the first man continued. "Private collectors will pay millions for proof that cryptids really exist. All we need is one good specimen." As the men moved deeper into the forest to set their new traps, Sarah quietly followed at a safe distance. She watched as they placed 3 more of the cruel devices along natural game trails, each one carefully concealed and positioned to cause maximum damage to whatever triggered it. When the poachers finally left the forest, Sarah sprang into action. Using her knowledge of animal behavior and the tracking skills she had developed during her years of fieldwork, she carefully disarmed each trap. But she knew this was only a temporary solution. The men would return, and next time they might bring more sophisticated equipment. Sarah spent the remainder of the night hiking through the forest, following the creature's trail deeper into the wilderness than she had ever ventured before. As dawn broke through the canopy, she found herself in a hidden valley she had never seen on any map of the region. The sight that greeted her there took her breath away. The valley was a natural sanctuary, hidden by steep cliffs and accessible only through a narrow passage between 2 massive rock formations. Within this secret refuge, Sarah observed a small community of the creatures she had encountered 3 days earlier. There were 6 of them in total. 2 adults and 4 smaller individuals that were clearly juveniles. They moved with purpose and intelligence, working together to maintain their hidden home. One was tending to a garden of medicinal plants that Sarah recognized from her veterinary training. Another was carefully weaving branches into what appeared to be a sophisticated shelter design. The creature she had treated was there as well, still favoring its injured leg but moving much better than when she had first found it. When it noticed her presence at the edge of the valley, it did something that changed everything Sarah thought she understood about interspecies communication. It approached her slowly, stopping just a few feet away, and extended one massive hand in what was unmistakably a gesture of greeting. Sarah slowly reached out her own hand, and the creature gently touched her fingers with its own. In that moment, Sarah felt a connection unlike anything she had experienced before. This was no ordinary animal. These beings possessed intelligence, culture, and social structure. They were a hidden civilization that had somehow managed to remain secret in the modern world. The creature led her to a particular area of the valley where the morning light filtered through the canopy in dappled patterns. There, carved into the smooth surface of a large boulder, were symbols and images that told a story. Sarah couldn't read the markings like text, but the meaning was clear enough. The images showed the creatures living in harmony with the forest for generations. They depicted the careful stewardship of the land, the protection of smaller animals, and the maintenance of natural balance. But the newer carvings told a different story. They showed the encroachment of human development, the destruction of habitat, and the increasing danger from hunters and trappers. The creature pointed to the most recent carving, which showed one of its kind caught in a trap. Then, it pointed to a new image that had clearly been added after their encounter 3 days ago. This one showed a human figure helping to free the trapped creature. Sarah realized she was looking at a record of her own actions, permanently preserved in stone. As the morning progressed, Sarah observed the daily life of this remarkable community. The creatures communicated through a complex system of gestures, vocalizations, and what appeared to be a rudimentary written language. They practiced what could only be described as agriculture, carefully cultivating plants that served both nutritional and medicinal purposes. Most remarkably, they seemed to serve as ecosystem managers for the entire region. Sarah watched as different individuals left the valley on what were clearly patrol routes, checking on the health of various areas within their territory. They moved deadfall to prevent forest fires, maintain water sources, and even seemed to have a system for monitoring the populations of various species. But their idyllic existence was under threat, and not just from the poachers Sarah had encountered the night before. She noticed signs of stress and concern among the creatures as they discussed something in their gestural language. One of the juveniles appeared to be ill, and, despite their knowledge of forest medicine, they seemed unable to treat whatever was affecting it. Sarah's veterinary instincts kicked in as she observed the sick young creature. Its symptoms suggested a respiratory infection that could be serious if left untreated. She had antibiotics in her pack that could help, but approaching to offer treatment would be a significant risk for both her and the creatures. The decision was made for her when the creature she had originally rescued approached and gestured toward the sick juvenile, then back to her. Somehow, it understood that she possessed knowledge that could help its community member. Working slowly and carefully, with the entire community watching her every move, Sarah examined the young creature. Her diagnosis had been correct. The juvenile was suffering from a bacterial respiratory infection that was beginning to affect its lungs. Without treatment, the condition could become life-threatening. Sarah administered a carefully calculated dose of antibiotics and provided instructions through gestures for continued care. The creatures observed everything she did with intense focus, clearly understanding that they were witnessing knowledge that could be vital for their survival. As Sarah prepared to leave the valley, the creature she had originally rescued approached her one final time. It handed her something that made her gasp in wonder. It was a small carved stone, no bigger than her palm, decorated with the same symbols she had seen on the boulder. But this one was different. It showed the image of a human and one of the creatures standing together, with symbols around them that could only represent friendship and mutual protection. Sarah understood that she had been given more than just a token of gratitude. She had been made an honorary guardian of this secret community, entrusted with knowledge that could either protect them or destroy them forever. The return journey to civilization felt like traveling between two different worlds. Sarah knew that everything had changed for her. She was no longer just a veterinarian who occasionally helped wildlife. She had become the keeper of one of the world's greatest secrets, and the responsibility weighed heavily on her shoulders. But, as she reached her truck at the trailhead, Sarah also felt a sense of purpose unlike anything she had ever experienced. These remarkable beings had trusted her with their secret, and she would do everything in her power to protect them from those who would exploit or harm them. The weeks following Sarah's discovery of the hidden valley were filled with careful planning and growing danger. The poachers had returned to the forest repeatedly, setting increasingly sophisticated traps and using night vision equipment to search for their elusive target. Sarah found herself making nightly trips into the wilderness, not just to disarm traps, but to serve as an early warning system for the creature community. She had developed a communication system with her new allies, using a combination of hand signals and simple drawings to share information about human threats. The creatures, in turn, had begun teaching her about their own knowledge of the forest. They showed her hidden water sources during drought conditions, safe passages through areas prone to avalanches, and medicinal plants that could treat injuries and illnesses she had never encountered in traditional veterinary training. The young creature she had treated for respiratory infection had made a full recovery, and its family had expressed gratitude in a way that brought tears to Sarah's eyes. They had created a small garden near the valley entrance, growing plants specifically chosen for their healing properties. It was their gift to her, a living pharmacy that demonstrated their understanding of her work as a healer. But the peaceful coexistence was shattered one autumn morning when Sarah arrived at her clinic to find two men waiting for her. They introduced themselves as representatives of a private research corporation, and their presence immediately set off every alarm bell in Sarah's head. Dr. Chen, we understand you've been spending considerable time in the Clearwater area recently, said the taller of the two men, his smile cold and professional. We're conducting a biological survey of the region and wondered if you might have observed any unusual wildlife activity. Sarah kept her expression neutral, but her mind raced. I do routine wildlife health assessments throughout the Forest Service area. Nothing particularly unusual, just the standard population monitoring we do every season. We have reports from local hunters about large, unidentified tracks in the area, the second man pressed. Some suggestions of a previously unknown large mammal species. As a veterinarian, you would certainly be interested in documenting such a discovery. I'd be very interested, Sarah replied carefully. If such an animal existed, proper scientific protocol would require extensive observation and documentation before any interference with its natural habitat. The men exchanged glances. Of course, Dr. Chen. Scientific protocol. We completely agree. In fact, we'd like to offer you a consulting position with our company. Very generous compensation for someone with your expertise to help us locate and study any unusual specimens. After the men left, Sarah immediately contacted Jake Morrison. The ranger's expression grew grim as she described the encounter. I've been hearing rumors about some kind of corporate expedition getting permits for extensive biological research in our area, Jake said. But the paperwork is all tied up in legal language that doesn't specify exactly what they're looking for. We need to warn them, Sarah said urgently. If these people are working with the poachers I encountered, the creatures are in serious danger. That night, Sarah made her most difficult journey yet into the hidden valley. When she arrived, she found the community in a state of high alert. The creatures had clearly sensed the increasing human presence in their territory, and their usual peaceful demeanor had been replaced by wariness and fear. Sarah used their communication system to explain the corporate threat, drawing pictures to show vehicles, nets, and capture equipment. The reaction was immediate and heartbreaking. The creatures understood exactly what she was describing. They had faced this kind of threat before, probably generations ago, and had nearly been wiped out. The eldest creature, who seemed to serve as a leader for the small community, approached Sarah with something she had never seen before. It was a collection of bark sheets covered with detailed symbols and drawings. As the creature carefully showed her each sheet, Sarah realized she was looking at a historical record of their species' interaction with humans. The early records showed peaceful coexistence, with humans and creatures working together to maintain forest health. But later entries told a darker story of hunting, capture, and forced displacement. The symbols clearly indicated that their species had once been much larger in number, spread across multiple valleys and mountain regions. Now, this small group might be the last survivors of their kind. The final bark sheet in the collection showed something that made Sarah's blood run cold. It depicted creatures in cages, being transported in vehicles and studied in laboratory-like settings. Some of the symbols suggested that captured individuals had been used for medical experiments or put on display for human entertainment. Sarah understood the message clearly. The creatures weren't just asking for her protection. They were sharing their history so she would understand exactly what was at stake if they were captured by the corporate researchers. I won't let that happen, Sarah said aloud, knowing that even though they might not understand her words, they would recognize the determination in her voice. We need to find a way to protect you permanently. The solution came from an unexpected source. Jake Morrison arrived at Sarah's clinic the next morning with news that changed everything. I've been doing research on the legal status of the forest area where you've been working, he said, spreading maps across her desk. Most of it is standard Forest Service land, but there's a section that's actually designated as a potential wilderness preserve. If we can prove that area contains endangered species or unique ecological significance, we can get it permanently protected from any kind of development or research. Sarah stared at the maps, her mind racing with possibilities. What would we need to prove? Scientific documentation of unique species or ecosystem characteristics. But here's the interesting part. The application can be filed by any qualified biologist or veterinarian who has conducted legitimate research in the area. And the creatures would be protected? Completely. No hunting, no trapping, no research without federal oversight, and definitely no private corporate access. The area would become a protected sanctuary. Sarah spent the next 2 weeks documenting everything she could about the Hidden Valley and its inhabitants without compromising their safety. She photographed their agricultural practices, their tool use, their complex social interactions, and their ecosystem management techniques. She documented plant species they cultivated that weren't found anywhere else in the region, water management systems they had created, and evidence of their positive impact on local wildlife populations. Most importantly, she worked with the creatures themselves to create a record that would prove their intelligence and sophistication without revealing their exact location or making them vulnerable to exploitation. The eldest creature seemed to understand exactly what Sarah was trying to accomplish, and began teaching her about their species' knowledge of forest management techniques that human scientists had never discovered. The application for wilderness preserve status was submitted on a cold November morning, accompanied by the most comprehensive ecological documentation Jake Morrison had ever seen. Sarah had created a scientific case that was impossible to argue with. The Hidden Valley and surrounding area contained unique species, sophisticated ecosystem management, and environmental characteristics that demanded protection. While they waited for the government response, the corporate researchers intensified their efforts. Sarah found evidence of motion-sensing cameras throughout the forest, and the poachers had begun using helicopter overflights to search for signs of large animal activity. The crisis came to a head on a snowy December evening when Sarah received an emergency call from Jake. "They're moving tonight," he said urgently. "Corporate vehicles, tranquilizer equipment, and capture gear. They're planning a full expedition into the Clearwater area." Sarah grabbed her emergency supplies and raced toward the forest, but she knew she couldn't reach the Hidden Valley before the corporate team. Her only hope was that the creatures' intelligence and knowledge of their territory would allow them to avoid capture until help arrived. When she finally reached the valley entrance, the scene was chaotic. Corporate vehicles were parked along the access road, and she could hear the sound of motors and machinery echoing through the forest. But something was wrong with their operation. Equipment was scattered and abandoned, and there were signs of confusion rather than organized capture efforts. As Sarah carefully made her way toward the Hidden Valley, she discovered what had happened. The creatures hadn't simply hidden from the corporate expedition. They had used their intimate knowledge of the forest to actively confuse and misdirect their pursuers. Fallen trees blocked access roads that had been clear hours before. Equipment had been carefully disassembled and scattered. Most remarkably, the entire expedition team was wandering in circles in a section of forest miles from the actual location of the Hidden Valley. The creatures had mounted a sophisticated defensive operation that used their understanding of human psychology and forest geography to render the corporate threat completely ineffective. They had protected themselves without causing harm to any of the humans involved. Sarah found the expedition team the next morning, cold and exhausted but unharmed, gathered around their vehicles and arguing about equipment failures and navigational errors. They left the forest that afternoon, convinced that their expensive technology had malfunctioned and that the area contained nothing more interesting than standard wildlife. The federal response to Sarah's wilderness preserve application came through just before Christmas. The Hidden Valley and surrounding territory had been granted protected status, effective immediately. No hunting, trapping, research, or development would be permitted without federal environmental oversight. Sarah delivered the news to the creatures on a crisp winter morning when the valley was dusted with fresh snow. Their reaction was unlike anything she had witnessed before. The entire community gathered around the carved boulder where they kept their historical records, and the eldest creature began adding new symbols to the stone. Sarah watched as her own story was permanently recorded alongside the ancient history of the creature's survival. The carving showed a human figure standing with the creatures beneath symbols that clearly represented protection and sanctuary. But the final symbol added to the stone was the most meaningful of all. It showed the human figure not as an outsider who had helped them, but as a permanent member of their community. Sarah Chen, veterinarian and guardian, had become the first human in generations to be officially adopted into the hidden society of the forest's most remarkable inhabitants. As winter settled over the protected valley, Sarah knew that her life had been permanently changed by her encounter with the creature in the trap. She had set out to rescue an injured animal and had discovered a calling as protector of one of the world's last great secrets. The creatures were safe, their valley was protected, and their knowledge would continue to benefit the forest ecosystem for generations to come. But, more than that, Sarah had found a purpose that combined her love of healing with her commitment to protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. Every morning, as she made her way through the protected forest to check on her extended family, Sarah carried the carved stone they had given her. It served as a reminder that heroism often comes not from single dramatic acts, but from the daily choice to stand up for those who need protection, no matter how different they might be from ourselves. The forest had revealed its most precious secret to her, and Sarah Chen had proven worthy of that trust. In saving the creatures, she had also saved a part of the natural world that could never be replaced, ensuring that future generations would inherit a wilderness still capable of magic and wonder.